Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, Chapter 1, Halacha 1, Part 3. Today, we're really going to be trying to get into and explore this in-between time called Bein Hashemashot, and we're going to be trying to get a literary explanation of exactly how long this period of time is. Now, the halacha l'maisa is 13 and a half minutes, but how do you go ahead and describe to a person learning Gemara 13 and a half minutes? So there's going to be other simanim that are going to be for you to look at in order to determine it. Now, another thing that we're going to look at here is the time for when the Kohanim can eat their truma. Now the halacha is that if they're tovel yom, that means that they're tamei, and then on that night they're allowed to eat. But sometime during the day they have to go into the mikvah. They have to dip into the mikvah before Bein Hashemashot, because if they don't and they are going to do it afterwards, then they actually postpone it another day. So if they're doing it after this, if they're doing the mikvah after this period of time, then legally what happens is they have to, that's the time they went to the mikvah during the day. That's the new day. And then only on the next night are they allowed to eat the trumos. But so that's obviously a mistake. What they should do is they should do it and go to the mikvah before that period of time of Bein Hashemashot, but then they have to wait until this uncertain period of time has occurred, and then they can eat the truma. So if you're if you're a tovel yom and you can do it in the morning, that's great. Then there's going to be no suffix. But halachically, you're allowed to do it just before this period of time, just before the evening comes, and then we want to know when is it going to be so that you can eat that night, or when is it going to be when you have to eat the next night? And we're also going to get into another explanation of this idea of what is going to be night, and we're also going to be getting into an explanation of how we have two in the halacha. We have two uncertainties about when is it going to be night. You're going to have one way by the Rashi and one way by his grandson, the Rabbeinu Tam. And the Rabbeinu Tam was looking at this Gemara in the Yerushalmi, and we're going to explain it so that you're really going to understand this stage of sunset and why the people who follow Rabbeinu Tam are gonna legally wait a little bit longer in order to do it. It's just an uncertainty, and we're not going to know until Eliyahu and Navi comes. So let's get into it. So we're going to look at another way to determine, before we were looking at stars. Now the halacha on that is, the halacha l'maisa, is that, according to the Rambam, when you're looking at the stars, let's say you see this one big star in the sky that's before sunset, and it's before, so that's probably a planet, and that's not going to count as a star. So really what the Rambam says is you're looking for three medium-sized stars that come after that are all clustered together. So the Rambam is saying that you're not looking at it where you have one star all the way to your left and one star all the way to your right and one star all the way behind you. That is not going to count. The Rambam's saying that you're having three medium stars that are clustered, and you're not counting that star that's visible before the sunset, because that's not really a star. So again, this idea of medium-sized stars, that's going to be a definite star. It's not going to be like Jupiter or Venus, and sometimes it can be Mars, depending on which year it is. Mars has a strange thing that can take 2.5 years. So every 2.5 years, it can be in a different place in the sky, and sometimes it can appear, depending on the has a retrograde cycle, which means that the other planets all go and turn in the same direction, but Mars turns in the opposite direction. And it doesn't actually, but it's just an optical illusion. And so what happens is that sometimes during that 2.5 year cycle, it can be where it's also in that area, and it can look like a star. And if you're counting bigger stars instead of medium-sized stars, you might actually be counting the wrong thing. So that's a halacha maisa. We're going to get into this other determination of how we're going to know when it starts to become Bein Hashemashot, which is that 13.5 minute period of time. That's the halacha. Rebbe says when the moon is at its maximum strength, in other words, what he's saying is that when it is full, at that time, its position is such that it rises in the east at the time that the sun sets in the west. And the following determination is possible. So the Gemara continues and says, when the sphere of the sun begins to set in the west and the sphere of the moon begins to rise in the east, this is Bein Hashemashot. So that's going to be very curious, and the commentators are gonna try to refine this because again it's a little bit curious. Okay, the situation that it looks like Rebbe's describing on the surface is one where when the sunset is exactly going down, the moon on the other side is popping up. Okay, and we know that that's not true. A lot of times the sun will be setting, and depending on the time of the year or where you are in the hemisphere, you'll look up and you'll see the moon maybe somewhere at around 11 o'clock in the sky. So that can't be right. And in fact, this wouldn't seem to be very practical, because there's a lot of times where you can experiment yourself, particularly in the summertime. You'll see that the moon will be somewhere above you when the sun is setting. So that really doesn't seem to be so practical. That might literally be true in some times of the year, but not all times of the year. And we're trying to get a time where it's very consistent, regardless of whether you're in the you're in the equinox or you're in the spring or you're in the autumn. So we need to refine this. So what the sages are saying, okay, and this is from the Vilna Goan. The Vilna Goan is saying that really the way to look at this is that this is the point. What Rebbe's saying, says the Vilna Goan, is that Rebbe means that this is when the sun begins to set and the moon begins to shine brightly. Okay, that's the Vilna Gaon's commentary on it. So that, although the setting of the sun is going to be a clearer sign, Rebbe is trying to provide, says the Vilna Gaon, an additional sign of moonlight for a situation in which the western horizon is obscured by clouds or mountains, and the true sunset can't be observed. So that as you're seeing this time where the moon starts to shine brightly, whether it's going to be above you or it's going to be right just above the horizon, that this moment of the moon becoming very illuminated, that's going to be this period of time that's this in-between time. Now, you might have a case where it's cloudy and you can't see the three stars, and maybe you're living in Jerusalem and there's hills and mountains, and I know in Har Nof, you have a hill that you can't see the exact time of the sunset because it goes over the hill. So if you have hills in the way, then you can't use just the sun setting as a measure. And if you have clouds, you can't necessarily just use the stars because it might be obscured. So he's giving this other way to determine it, where you can start to see that, okay, the sun basically started going down over that hill, and now I see it didn't quite go down yet. The sun didn't quite go down yet, and now I see it changed. It went over this hill, and the illumination didn't quite pop up yet on the moon, and then it starts to pop. So really, what he's giving is another way to determine, when this in between time starts. So Rabbi Hanina is either going to be a Rabbi Hanina who's a Tana, or this is going to be a Rabbi Hanina who's an Amorah. It's unclear who this is. Okay, so if this is an Amorah, it doesn't mean that he's providing a dissent to Rebbe, but if this is Rabbi Hanina the Tana, then it could be a dissent, and or a way to question this. So it's unclear, who is saying this. So Rabbi Hanina said Rebbe actually stated his teaching as follows. Okay, again, this might be a Tana who's challenging it, or it might be an Amorah who's simply explaining it. Not sure. Okay, and by the way, none of the commentators are sure. Okay, there's commentators that argue for both ways. So it's really unclear who this is, and it's not just me saying, "Oh, I don't know." I'm saying that actually all of us were not sure. The commentators are not sure either. Rabbi Hanina said Rebbe actually stated his teaching as follows: when the sphere of the sun finishes setting in the west and the sphere of the moon begins rising in the east, this is Bein Hashemashot. So one way to read it is that Rabbi Hanina is explaining that the sphere of the moon rises, and this is when Bein Hashemashot commences, and only at the end of the sunset. And there's another way to look at it where that he's effectively, if he's going to be a Tana, it's going to be disputing Rebbe and offering effectively a different time for Bein Hashemashot. So this is very unclear. Rebbe, the Gemara now is going to support Rabbi Hanina's version. So this is why learning Yerushalmi is so difficult, and why a lot of people have a lot of trouble with it, and why it's not always so popular, because the texts are very difficult by nature. That's why you always have to really look at the Meforshim for help, because they're spending an inordinate amount of time to try to unpack these statements, and it's hard to get exactly what's going on without the help of the Meforshim, because a lot of the text is very difficult. So, like we see here, this could have been a Tana or it could have been an Amorah. And if it's the Tana, he's giving a different opinion. And if it's an Amorah, he's just clarifying it. We're not sure which. So the Gemara is going to support Rabbi Hanina's version and say that, and Shmuel taught a brisa that states similarly that at the time of the full moon, the moon does not shine while the sun is setting, nor does it set while the sun is shining. Rather, the moon rises at the end of sunset and sets at the beginning of sunset. So what this is trying to say is that this brisa should be read that Bein Hashemashot would commence when the sun has finished setting and the moon has begun rising. That's one way to read it. So in other words, it's not necessarily what Rebbe said in the beginning, where it's when the illumination starts to happen on the moon. What Shmuel is refining is that no, another way to look at this is when the moon, the motion of the moon, didn't just come up over the horizon, or isn't just up, maybe at 10 o'clock over you, in the 10 o'clock position over you, that it's really now rising and moving toward where the sunset would be. And this moving motion of rising, that this is what is going to be determining Bein Hashemashot. So you can see that this is a very different idea, that you could have this sunset occurring in different stages, and the first stage can be when the sun is disappearing from the view over the horizon, and the rays are still having some illumination, and then you can have this like second stage where the sun has totally gone over the horizon and there's no more rays popping out from the sun. But whatever is left, it starts to make the western horizon very red. Okay, and now you have this opinion from Rebbe about when this sun has disappeared, what's going on with the moon at this red view. Is the moon going to become more enlightened and start to pop with illumination, and that's going to be the sign? Or is it going to be like what Shmuel says Rabbi Hanina is saying, which is that no, it's actually going to be this motion, this upward motion, and that's really when you're seeing this real upward motion, that's going to be the period of time for when Bein Hashemashot you're really in that period of in between time. So two different versions of this. So the Gemara now is going to talk about a Goan who is Tameh, and they have to go to the mikveh before Bein Hashemashot in order to be allowed to eat truma at nightfall. And they have to be on time, because if they're not on time, they have to wait until the next day. In other words, after Bein Hashemashot, if he immerses at night, he has to wait until the next nightfall before eating truma. So if you have this uncertain time, this questionable time of Bein Hashemashot, then it's going to be difficult. I mean, look, if the Goan goes in the morning, there's no problem. But let's say the Goan is busy or he's traveling and he can't do it until night. You want to know when is the last possible time in order to do it by the halacha. So a Goan who wants to eat the truma that night, after having been at Tovul Yom and going to the mikveh and then doing it before this period of time, he has to immerse before Bein Hashemashot, but when it is still definitely day. In other words, like he could do it when one star is out. That is a time where it's definitely day. But he really can't do it at this in-between time. And then really what he has to do is he has to wait until after Bein Hashemashot is over, when it will be definitely night, and then he can eat. So I want you to be very clear on the law. He can't immerse during Bein Hashemashot, okay? Because it's in between. You're not sure, okay? If you're doing a sin against Shabbat during that period of time, you have to bring an Asham Tuloi offering. That's an offering in the case of doubt, because you might have done a sin. So over here, it's the same thing. You have to do it before and immerse before Bein Hashemashot. But now you can't eat during Bein Hashemashot either. So you have to know how long this period of time is going to last for. And you can eat after this in-between time. You're not allowed to eat during it, because part of it might still technically be during that day. And then you ate truma during that day before true nightfall. And that's going to be a big halachic problem. So you have to wait until after. You have to do the mikvah before, and you have to wait out this entire period of Bein Hashemashot in between, and then you can do it after. So that's just a breakdown of how this thing works. Here's what the Gemara says: Rabbi Shmuel bar Chia bar Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Hanina, when the sphere of the sun begins to set, a man who is standing at the peak of Mount Carmel, and who is a Goan that is Tameh, may descend the mountain, immerse himself in the Mediterranean Sea near the base of the mountain, and come up from the water, and then he may eat his truma at night after the stars have come out, because it is presumable that he has immersed himself in the sea by day before Bein Hashemashot had begun. So let's unpack this. So Rabbi Hanina is following his own opinion, which we were just talking about with Bein Hashemashot, which it does not start until the end of sunset. Okay, and I want to point out that this is how Rabbeinu Tam is getting a lot of this. This is where the source for Rabbeinu Tam is. Okay, and here's what it is. Rebbeinu Tam is saying that the end of sunset occurs when the daylight has faded, long after the sun has actually disappeared. And accordingly, Rabbi Hanina is stating that if the Goan, who is Tameh, begins descending the mountain at sunset, when the sun begins to set, he has ample time to reach the sea, immerse himself in it before the beginning of Bein Hashemashot, when the sun finishes setting. So his immersion will have taken place during the day. That, by the way, is the commentary of the Tosfot as the parallel in the Bavli. So you can find parallel for this in Shabbos 35a, also in Berechot, in the Yerushalmi, in chapter 1. So now there's two ways to look at this. Okay, so they're gonna qualify this ruling. Okay, and here's how the Gemara says it. It says, this was stated regarding one who goes down the mountain by the way of the shortcut, but as for one who goes down by the way of the highway, they do not refer to this person. In other words, at this time, says the Pnei Moshe, there were two paths down Mount Carmel. One was a proper road, and the other was a popular shortcut. And the descent took longer by the way of the road, which followed a gentle winding route, rather than a shortcut, which was cut deeply and steeply down the mountain. And the assumption that a Goan can descend Mount Carmel and immerse before the sun finishes pertains to one who uses the shortcut for his descent. And if one descends on the highway, he is not assured of immersing before Bein Hashemashot, so he cannot eat the truma until the next night. So this is a very, this is a very inside baseball, so to speak, way to look at it, because, well, we don't have a way to know what is going to be the original road and the shortcut, and we don't, all we can do is we can go there today and we can imagine, a straight road going straight down the highway, or down to the highway right by the sea. Where there's a highway there today, right by the sea. And all you can do is imagine that this is what the road would have been like back then. So the Gemara wants to start to try to sharpen it up, because this seems a very vague way to try to determine the time for all the halacha. So, it was taught, before that Bein Hashemashot lasts from when 2 stars appear until 3 stars appear, or from, when the sky grays until it blackens. And now the Gemara is going to look at it differently. They're going to look at this duration differently. And so, because again, they're trying to dial in how long is this period of time. Again, the halacha is 13 and a half minutes. That's great, but you can't write that in a Gemara because, how do you write 13 and a half minutes in the Gemara? You have to find a way to describe it where somebody can look at the natural events and understand that this is the period of time, this is before the immersion, this is after. This is also going to be a way to literally describe it to get it down to 13 and a half minutes. So this is what we're in the process of trying to do. And it's kind of neat because there's a lot of benefit in learning Torah of being able to get to the point where you can start to look at the astrological signs and start to get a precision to it. In other words, one of the big merits of learning Torah, we know this in chapter 7 in Shabbos, that it's going to be in Halacha too, that sages who are not looking at astrological determinations for seeing how these things work, like what we're working on right now, that they're very questionable. And the Gemara there says that they're almost kind of like heretics, like stay away from them, right? Because these are like advanced types of teachings that help us to understand the creation that a Kodesh Baruch Hu made. And there's the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim says that these sorts of astronomical studies, like what we're doing, is very important for your growth in Judaism, because it helps you to understand Hashem better. He says that the advanced students should be learning these sorts of things because the number one mitzvah is to know Hashem. And the Rambam writes in Moreh Nevuchim that the best way to start to know Hashem is by actually studying these things, and you start to see the precision, and then it helps you to know Hashem in a much deeper way, which is very exciting and very beautiful. Now, how do you start to define 13 and a half minutes where you can start to go out, whether it's going to be a cloudy sky or whether there's going to be a hill in the way, and that you're going to be able to come up with this 13 and a half minute measurement? You're going to be able to write it down in a Gemara and be able to express it, so that whether you can't quite see the moon, or you can't quite see the hills because there's hills there, and you can't quite see the sunset, you can start to look at the sky, the change of the color of the sky, how that's going to work, and you're going to start to know these astrological times. And when we're done with this, we're going to start to get into sunrise, although that's not going to be today. But there's going to be Gemaras that are going to try to explain this in words for something that's going to be mathematical. This is 13 minutes and 30 seconds. So how do we describe 13 minutes and 30 seconds in words? Gemara is going to start trying to refine it. Here's what it says. It says, what is the duration of Bein Hashemashot? Rabbi Tanhuma said, it is analogous to a drop of blood that is placed on the edge of the sword. When enough time elapses that the drop is divided, with part falling to this side of the blade and part falling to that side of the blade, this is the duration of Bein Hashemashot immediately after it is definite night. So Rabbi Tanhuma, this is going to be a commentary by the Pnei Moshe. Rabbi Tanhuma is saying that he's disputing the opinion of this Brisa before about the highway. And he's saying that Bein Hashemashot begins when the sky grays and lasts until the sky blackens, which is a duration of a number of minutes. It can be 13 and a half minutes. And the Vilna Goan, he's going to say like this. He's going to say he concurs with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, cited in the next Brisa that's coming up, that Bein Hashemashot lasts as long as a blink of an eye. And the Rosh Cirilio, who's a really great commentator on the Yerushalmi, Tanhuma indicates that Bein Hashemashot itself, though very brief, can still be divided, and it follows that there is uncertainty not whether Bein Hashemashot is considered day or night, but also whether part of it belongs to the day and part of it belongs to the night. So that's another wrinkle that's added. If you're going to look at the Rosh Cirilio, in other words, part of the day is still in Bein Hashemashot, and part of the night is still in there. And that's what makes it where you would, if you violate it, you'd have to bring this Asham Toloi, because he's saying that it's not, this period of time is not an uncertainty. Rosh Cirilio is pointing out from this that a much deeper point is that part of the day is still inside of Bein Hashemashot, and that's why it's a sin. And part of the night is still in there. And that's why you have a problem, because let's say you're a Goan and you immerse before and you start to eat your truma during Bein Hashemashot. Well, you're, according to how Rosh Cirilio is reading this, you actually still have part of the day inside of this period of time. Bein Hashemashot is in between time. And so effectively, you're still eating kind of during the day, which you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to eat truma during the day of when you immerse. You have to eat only at night. So you have to wait until this entire period of time is over, because this period of time has a mixture of day and night inside of it. And that's very elegant, getting back to this creation of Berechot, where you have this mixture of light and dark. And this effectively is the point of the Rosh Cirilio's reading of this, is that you have this in-between time where there's this mixture of day and night inside of it. Just like in the creation, you had this, strange form, before forms, but you had this strange mixture of light and dark that coexisted inside of this when you had the first day. And so inside of it, you were also having this, implicit in the, as an after part of this creation, this, day and night, day and dark mixed into this period of time. And that's part of the problem of eating during this period of time. You have to wait until it's definite night, where it's, there's no part of the day after Bein Hashemashot, and that's why you have to wait until after it is. Now, the trick is, how do we calculate that? That's going to be the tricky part. So the Brisa is going to cite a variant opinion. It's going to say, what is the duration of Bein Hashemashot? And it's going to say, from the time when the sun has set, Bein Hashemashot lasts long enough for a man to walk half a mil, and after that, it is night. So a mil is going to be 2,000 amos, and that is going to be, traversed in 18 minutes. Okay, that's the standard time to do 2,000 mil. So if you're going to walk half a mil, that's going to be 9 minutes, and they're going to say that this is the duration of Bein Hashemashot. Now, we know that we're trying to get to 13 and a half minutes, so we know that this can't be the right interpretation of the Gemara. So so let me read it again. What is the duration of Bein Hashemashot from the time when the sun is set? And Bein Hashemashot lasts long enough for a man to walk half a mil, and after that it is night. So that is going to be 9 minutes. That's not what we're looking for. These are the words of Rabbi Nehemiah. Rabbi Yossi says, and by the way, the Vilna Goan is going to agree, as we had mentioned before, is going to agree with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, the duration of Bein Hashemashot is only as long as the blink of an eye, and the sages were unable to determine it. So the Rosh Cirilio is going to continue the explanation here, and he's going to say that there are two possible explanations for this statement. One explanation is that the sages identified the precise blink of an eye that constitutes Bein Hashemashot, but they were unable to determine whether this brief interval itself is legally considered day, night, or a combination of day and night. Another explanation, says the Rosh Cirilio, is that the sages were unable to identify the precise moment during twilight at which Bein Hashemashot, which contains the transition from day to night, occurs. And we see that the Amorim disagree as to which of these interpretations is correct. I personally like the idea that when you're talking about a blink of an eye, what Rabbi Yossi is saying, according to the Rosh Cirilio, it's going to be the second one, which is that this blink of the eye is going to be from, at this twilight period where you're going to have the transition from day to night, so that it's going to be this blink of an eye. You have this in-between period of time that's a combination, right? And this blink of an eye is going to be that period of time that transitions from where the day is totally taken out of this in-between time, and then it's night. And that within the Bein Hashemashot, that's going to be that period of time. But the Rabbeinu Tam is also going to have an opinion about this. And here's how the Rabbeinu Tam is going to explain it. Okay, so the Rebbeinu Tam is going to say like this. He's going to say that the end of sunset occurs much later than the beginning of sunset, and he's going to actually be basing this on the Bavli. Okay, that the beginning and the end of sunset, enough time elapses for a man to walk 3¼ mil. Now that's going to equal 58.5 minutes. Now we know that a mil is going to be 18 minutes, and he's saying that is 3¼ so that's 3.25 times 18. That's going to come up to 58.5. So then you're going to say, well, Bein Hashemashot lasts, long enough for a man to walk 3/4 of a mil, and that's how you come up to 13 and a half minutes. So a total of 72 minutes is going to be enough to walk 4 mil, and that walk of 72 minutes is going to be from the beginning of sunset when the sun just goes over the horizon, not over the hill, but actually over the horizon, like over the sea, where Mount Carmel is, until the end of Bein Hashemashot. So what's happening according to Rabbeinu Tam and how he's reading this, and from the Bavli parallel in Berechot, he's saying that the first 58 minutes after the sun disappears from the beginning to the end of sunset are considered definite day, and the next 13 and a half minutes, which constitutes Bein Hashemashot, is going to be this questionable time, and definite nightfall only occurs after 72 minutes after the sun disappears over the horizon. So this is how the calculation is going to be for Rabbeinu Tam. He's going to say that Bein Hashemashot is going to begin as soon as the sun disappears, and it's going to. So, sorry, the other Goanim are going to say like this. Okay, according to the normal opinion by the Goanim and articulated, by Rashi, it's going to be that Bein Hashemashot begins as soon as the sun has disappeared and lasts the next 13 and a half minutes. Thus, definite nightfall occurs a mere 13 and a half minutes after the sun disappears. Now, one way to interpret what Rabbeinu Tam is talking about, Rabbeinu Tam might be talking about the amount of time to, say, go down to the sea, dip himself in before it's going to be Bein Hashemashot, and say, like, the latest possible time you could do it is when only one star is out, and then you dip yourself in, and then you have enough time to walk back up to the top of Mount Carmel, and then once you get up to the top of Mount Carmel, which would take about 72 minutes, that's going to be where it's definitely night, where there's no question or disagreement, and according to Rabbeinu Tam, there would be no problem at that point to be able to eat the truma. In other words, the dispute here could be that Rabbeinu Tam is calculating this from the time where, definitely it's going to be, the end of sunset and the daylight faded, and it would be the amount of time that the Kohanim could go back down, immerse, and then go all the way back up to Mount Carmel. And definitely all this, in between time has ended. There's no more suffix anymore. And by the time he gets up to the top of the mountain, there's no problem to eat. There's no questions. All the questions are done. And so effectively, this could be what Rabbeinu Tam is doing and how he's calculating it. I want to bring out Rabbeinu Tam because half the Jewish world half the Haredi world keeps Rabbeinu Tam. And if you're not really looking at this in detail, you can't understand why they're doing it, how they're deriving it. And that's why it's so important to bring it up. And also to bring up the standard opinion as well. I myself don't keep Rabbeinu Tam, but I'm not saying it's wrong. I just don't. But a lot of people do, and the explanation by Rabbeinu Tam is totally valid. I mean, it's a totally reasonable explanation that, yes, by the time he went down, dipped into the sea, came back up, all the in-between times is over, and it's definitely nightfall, and definitely there's no problem to eat. Let's get back into the Gemara. This is going to be the Rabbi Yossi, who is an Amarah, and this is going to be a little bit hard because this is an Amarah who's looking at the opinion of a Tana named Rabbi Yossi. Before, when we're looking at this opinion by Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi says the duration of Bein Hashemashot is only long as a blink of an eye, and sages are unable to determine it. This Rabbi Yossi is the Tana. Now we're going to have the Rabbi Yossi, who is going to be an Amarah. And I know this is an Amarah because he's sitting with another Amarah named Rabbi Acha. Rabbi Acha, there's a few Rabbi Achas in the Yerushalmi. One of them is very famous for a lot of agadic statements, but these are a bit later. These are a bit later Amorim. So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Acha were sitting. Now they're going to be talking about Rabbi Yossi's opinion, Rabbi Yossi the Tana. Rabbi Yossi the Amara is going to be talking about Rabbi Yossi the Tana, just to make it really clear. So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Acha were sitting, and Rabbi Yossi said to Rabbi Acha, it is not reasonable to assume that the end of Rabbi Nehemiah's half-mil Ben Hashemashot's period is when Rabbi Yossi's, as a blink of an eye, Ben Hashemashot's period occurs. So in other words, what Rabbi Yossi is asking to Rabbi Acha is he's saying that, look, Rabbi Yossi the Amara understands the statement of Rabbi Yossi the Tana as saying that the sages were unable to figure it out and determine it. And that's to mean that they could not come up with this brief interval of Ben Hashemashos, whether it's going to be considered day or night. And they did, however, know that this moment occurs, and it comes at the end of Rabbi Nehemiah's Ben Hashemashos period. But Rabbi Yossi is going to be disagreeing with Rabbi Nehemiah only. Rabbi Yossi the Tana is going to be disagreeing with Rabbi Nehemiah the Tana only on how long Ben Hashemashos lasts. He agrees with him, says Rabbi Yossi the Amara, regarding the time of nightfall, which occurs at the end of Ben Hashemashos, but the question is going to be, how long is that going to last? It's going to be, from that total transition where there might be some day inside of Ben Hashemashos and it's totally night, and Rabbi Yossi the Tana is basically saying that it's going to last the blink of an eye. Well, how long is that? We don't really know. Okay, but it's going to be a blink of an eye, but we don't know how long that is. But it is a blink of an eye, whichever that is, right? So that's where we're at right now. So according to this approach, the entire period up to the blink of an eye that constitutes Ben Hashemashos is considered definite day still. And therefore, the Tamei Kohen may immerse himself in a mikveh up until a brief moment before definite nightfall, and then eat the truma at night. That's what Rabbi Yossi the Amara is hinting at. He's saying that since there's still some day in this in-between period, you can rely on this still day part inside of the Ben Hashemashos, and that he could still technically go in the mikveh during Ben Hashemashos, and then have, wait until after that blink of the eye, where in this in-between period of time, all the day has gone out of it, so that there's no more mixture of day and night inside of Ben Hashemashos. All the day has been removed, and it's just night, and then he can eat. That's effectively what he's going to be asking. That's going to be a little bit more risky than what we had been looking at. In other words, we've been looking at a time where they're going to the mikveh before Ben Hashemashos. They're waiting until Ben Hashemashos is totally finished, and then they're going to eat after, where it's totally night. And that, by the way, is a formulation of what Rebbe Tam was talking about. Rabbi Acha replies. He says that I myself also think so, but Rabbi Hizkiah does not say so. Rather, he says that according to Rabbi Yossi the Tana, each and every blink of an eye within Rabbi Nehemiah's half-mil Ben Hashemashos period is of uncertain status. So let's take a look at what's going on here. Basically, what Rabbi Acha is saying, he's saying that Rabbi Hizkiah maintains that when Rabbi Yossi the Tana said in the Beraisa that the sages were unable to determine it, he meant that they could not identify the precise moment of Ben Hashemashos. Thus, Rabbi Yossi agrees with Rabbi Nehemiah that the entire half-mil period following the end of sunset is an uncertain status, which means merely to clarify the precise nature of the uncertainty. Rabbi Nehemiah stated simply that Ben Hashemashos lasts as long as it takes to walk a half a mil, and this can be understood to mean that the entire half-mil period has the same status either day or night, but we cannot ascertain the status. Now, the the um, the Rosh Hashanah says like this, that in short, according to Rabbi Hiskia's understanding, Rabbi Yossi agrees with Rabbi Nehemiah as to the duration of the uncertainty, but he informs us that the uncertainty includes not only the possibilities that Bein Hashemashot is entirely day and that it is entirely night, but also that the possibility that it is partly day and partly night. So this is really the key point of Rabbeinu Tam, that in other words, when you're going for this 72 minute period of time where you've gone to the mikveh, you've gone into the sea from Mount Carmel, you've dipped, the sun is now set, okay, and now you're taking this 72-minute walk back up, okay, you've passed all these in between times, and so then there's no question, there's no suffix, and then you can sit and you can eat, and that's really the point of Rabbeinu Tam. So there's going to be a challenge to Rabbi Hiskia. Rabbi Mana said, I posed a question for Rabbi Hiskia. Now, who is talking here? This is going to be Rabbi Mana, who's the head of the academy in Sipari, and Rabbi Hiskia here is going to be the Rabbi Hiskia who used to be the head of the academy. He built the academy, and then he turned it over to a student, Rabbi Mana, so that this Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Acha are going to be contemporaries of Rabbi Mana. Rabbi Mana is one of the last Amorim in the Yerushalmi. So Rabbi Mana, he's the Rosh Yeshiva of the Academy of the North, is asking the previous Rosh Yeshiva. He's saying, Rabbi Mana said, I posed a question for Rabbi Hiskia when we learned a Mishnah that was taught elsewhere in the tractate of Zavim in the Academy. If a man experienced one discharge of Ziva during the day and another one during Bein Hashemashot, or he experienced the first one during Bein Hashemashot and the second one the next day, in other words, definite night, when it's indefinite night, if he knows with certainty that part of the Bein Hashemashot discharge occurred this day and part of it occurred the next day, in other words, it began slightly before Bein Hashemashot and it ended slightly after Bein Hashemashot, so that it definitely began on one day and ended on the next, then he is a definite Zav, both in regard to Tuma and regard to, bringing an offering. He has to bring an offering because the Bein Hashemashot discharge alone counts as 2 discharges. So he is deemed to have had a total of 3 discharges. Now, let's look at the Haredim to explain this. So, since the status of Bein Hashemashot is questionable, one can know that the flow began on the first of the day bridged by Bein Hashemashot and ended on the later of these days only if the flow began slightly before Bein Hashemashot and ended slightly after Bein Hashemashot. But in this case, since the flow is known to have spanned parts of 2 days, if he counts as 2, discharges, then, together with his other discharge, the Zav will have experienced a total of 3 discharges within 2 consecutive days, so he's obligated to bring an offering. So, you have 2 cases in here. You have a case where you have one discharge happens before Bein Hashemashot, and you have another one that happens after. By the way, what this is talking about a discharge for a man from gonorrhea. So if you have, which is an STD, and this is going to be talking about a discharge for gonorrhea before Bein Hashemashot and then after, and then how is that going to count? And then what happens if it occurs, before, during, and after? And then what happens if it happens, before and during Bein Hashemashot? How is that going to be counted? So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, if he is uncertain whether part of the discharge occurred this day and part of it occurred the next day. In other words, what it's trying to say is that the discharge coincided precisely during this Bein Hashemashot period, where the status itself is going to be questionable. It's possible that the entire discharge only occurred on one day. In other words, if it happened before Bein Hashemashot and then during Bein Hashemashot, maybe it's only one discharge during the day. So the Gemara continues, and it says that, then he is a definite zav in regards to tuma and uncertain in regards to bringing the offering. In other words, if he has this discharge, definitely you're tamei. Okay, that whenever that happens, you're tamei. That's d'oraita. That's in the Torah. But the question is, at what point does he have to bring an offering? Because if you have three discharges, you have to bring an offering. But if you have two, you don't have to bring an offering. So that's I want to read on the Haredim on this, and here's how the Haredim says this. He's saying that since Bein Hashemashot might be entirely day or might be entirely night, and it might be partly day and partly night, then a discharge that occurs with Bein Hashemashot, we do not know whether it occurred on one day or the next, or on one day or on 2 days. So in this case, the Zav certainly experienced no less than two discharges, one during Bein Hashemashot and another either beforehand or after. And since two discharges within a 2-day period bring the severe tuma of ziva on a man, this man is a definite zav in regard to tuma, and therefore he contaminates things on which he sits or he lies. He has to wait 7 clean days and then go to the mikvah. And in order to be liable for an offering, if you have 3 discharges, then you're liable to bring an offering. And it's going to be questionable now with Bein Hashemashot if he has it before Bein Hashemashot, during Bein Hashemashot, and after Bein Hashemashot. Is that going to be 3 discharges or not? In other words, maybe if it happened during Bein Hashemashot, it's part of the first day. So it's 2 during the first day and 1 during the second day. So in that case, it's going to be it's going to be part of, it's going to count as part of the first day. And so then you can have, if the Bein Hashemashot flow is legally going to be considered, says the Haredim, to have occurred partly by day and partly at night, then it alone counts as 2, and it would count as if he had 3 discharges. And if the Bein Hashemashot flow is considered to have occurred entirely by day or night, it counts as 1 on one day and then 1 on the other day. In other words, it counts as part of the flow from the first day, and so it's only 2, so there's no offering. He definitely has tuma. Okay, definitely there's tuma, and definitely now that there's 2, he has 2 zav flows. He's going to be tamei for a 7-day period of time. That's definite. Okay, and now he's going to have to. If it's 3, now he has to also bring an offering. So it's going to be unclear as to, what's he going to do on this. So Rabbi Mana's going to be. So hold on. So let me finish this Gemara. The Gemara says, and if he is uncertain whether part of the discharge occurred on this day and part of it occurred on the next day, then he is a definite zav in regarding to tuma, and uncertain in regard to bringing an offering, because it's uncertain whether he had 2 discharges or 3 discharges. So Rabbi Mana is basically, is posing this challenge to Rabbi Hiskiah from this Mishnah in Zavim. And when he's speaking to Rabbi Hiskiah, he introduced this challenge by citing this other opinion by an earlier Amorah regarding the Mishnah. So here's how the challenge goes. And Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef inquired before Rabbi Yochanan, who is this Tana who teaches in the first clause that a discharge beginning before Bein Hashemashot and ending after it is divided in two. And Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef concluded it is none other than Rabbi Yossi who said this. For the previous Mishnayot in Zavim teach that if a flow of ziva lasts long enough for a man to have immersed in a mikveh and toweled himself dry before the beginning and the end, which is as long as it takes to walk 50 amos, it always counts as two discharges, even if it occurs on one day. Thus, the ruling that a flow beginning specifically before Bein Hashemashot and ending specifically after Bein Hashemashot counts as two discharges because it occurred on 2 days. It is relevant only to a flow that lasts less than that time needed to walk 50 amos. And according to Rabbi Nehemiah, who holds that Bein Hashemashot lasts as long as it takes to walk half a mil, which is 1,000 amos, a flow lasting less than that time required to walk 50 amos cannot possibly span Bein Hashemashot. And therefore, the Mishnah follows Rabbi Yossi, who holds that Bein Hashemashot lasts no longer than the blink of an eye. So, according to what this is saying, says the Haredim, that the Mishnah teaches that in the event a flow begins just before the blink of an eye and ends just afterward, it counts as two discharges, despite having lasted less than the time needed to walk 50 amos because it occurred over 2 days. That's basically what they're saying. They're saying that even if it happened over less than that period of time to walk 50 amos, which is not a long period of time. So, in other words, it happened just before Bein Hashemashot, and then it happens on Bein Hashemashot, the second flow, and that happens like after that blink of an eye. So, is that going to count as being part of the first flow, or is it going to count as part of the second flow? So, in other words, because you could say that this in-between period of time still has day inside of it. Because it still has day inside of it, and the second flow happened after this blink of an eye in Bein Hashemashot, and it's close enough with the first discharge of Zav, okay, that really what he's saying is that this could all happen faster than you could go, faster than you could walk 50 amos. In other words, it could all happen inside of a few seconds, and then it will count as two. So then he'll basically be a very serious, he'll be av tuma, and so he has to wait 7 days and then go to the mikveh. So the Gemara is going to try to rebut Rabbi Mana's challenge. Okay, so here's what it says. Gemara says, why did he tell Rabbi Hiskiah that this Mishnah is difficult according to his interpretation? The Mishnah can be explained as referring to the law that will be in effect when Eliyahu HaNavi comes and tells us this is the precise blink of an eye that constitutes Bein Hashemashot. In other words, he's saying that Elijah the prophet, who's going to come just before Mashiach comes, he's going to resolve all the halachic matters, and one of them is going to be how long this blink of an eye actually is, to determine whether it's going to be part of this day or part of the next day. And the Gemara is going to reject the resolution of Rabbi Hiskiah's view. It's going to say once Elijah the prophet resolves our uncertainty as to when the moment of Bein Hashemashot occurs, who can distinguish and say that he will also resolve our uncertainty as to what the status of Bein Hashemashot is? And surely Elijah the prophet will also tell us whether Bein Hashemashot is considered entirely day, entirely night, or partly day and partly night. So then really the question is going to be, how then can the Mishnah rule in this later clause that a discharge of Zav coincides with Bein Hashemashot, and the man is in a state of uncertainty with respect to the obligation to bring an offering? And clearly we see from this ruling on the Zav that the law pertaining nowadays before the arrival of Eliyahu Navi, when the status of Bein Hashemashot is uncertain, and accordingly the proof presented is that, the Mishnah's first clause that regarded Rabbi Yossi, the moment of Bein Hashemashot itself is defined as as this blink of an eye, and the status of this whole thing, whether it's going to be this mixture or have day in it, have night in it, be day, be night, that's going to be what's going to be resolved as well. So tomorrow we're going to get on daylight. We were talking about nightfall and stars, and now we have to have the logical next conclusion. What about the rise of the sun? When is that going to be? I want to point out that Rabbeinu Tam's point is that because all of this is uncertain and all of this is unresolved, okay, by waiting this entire period of time, you've basically, because Bein Hashemashot is undefined, and because the amount of time is, at when this, exactly, has changed, where, let's say it's the end of Bein Hashemashot and it had some daylight inside of it. Let's say it's a mixture, like what the Rosh Hashanah was pointing out. It's a mixture of day and night, and that the at the end of Bein Hashemashot, what is the amount of time needed for all the daylight to be out of it before the night is just it just has night? That's a blink of an eye. So at what point does all that occur? Well, that's very hard to determine. So the methodology of the Rebbeinu Tam is to make sure that after you've ascended back up the mountain, that you've went into the mikveh before Bein Hashemashot, that has to happen before. There's not waiting until you're during Bein Hashemashot to do it. You're doing it before, and then you're walking up the entire hill. And by the time you get to the entire hill, then all of this process and event has finished, and you're definitely in nighttime, so there's no problem to eat. And that is the shita of Rabbeinu Tam in a short cut. Tomorrow we're getting into sunrise.